Today, at the brackets of science technical seminars at Yandex, we received their speaker Ingmar Weber. He is a researcher at company Yahoo, and by the way, he is quite popular speaker because, as I know, today for him it's a second talk. The first one was at RIA Novosti. And also I want to open one small secret. Ingmar speaks Russian.
Нет, неправильно. Ничего.
But he asked you to ask you a question after his talk in English, please. And so
or German, if you want. That's also fine.
Or in German, yes.
No.
Talk will be in English. And so don't miss your chance, because maybe it's just one time when you see Ingmar. So ask a question, be proactive, and please, I want to give the floor to Ingmar.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So first of all, I must say I'm impressed by the sort of turnout. It's already 7 in the evening. In Barcelona in our office, nobody would be here by this time. So people in Moscow are really hard working. So thank you for being here. So what am I going to talk about? So I will talk about political polarization. Essentially, there are 2 recent projects of mine. So one where we used search logs, and another one where we used Twitter. So in the first part of my talk, I will talk about search, like political search. And I actually want to start with showing you a live demo. That's always the best way of explaining what something is about. So this is a public tool that you can go to. It's called Political Search Trends. Maybe don't go to it now and try to bring it down. I mean, it's reasonably robust, but against some really hacky queries, who knows what will happen. So what does this tool try to do? So it tries to show you queries. So these are web search queries for the US. This is for the US market, categorized into leaning. So this is now political leaning, right? So and the colors are sort of blue is traditionally the color for Democrats in the US. Red is traditionally the colors for Republicans. So let me first show you that this leaning is not completely random. So if you search for something like lies, so now on the left you have something like Fox News lies, Republican lies, right? And on the right you have something such as like Obama lies and Michael Moore lies, right? So if you're vaguely familiar with US politics, this should at least indicate plausibility, right? Sort of that this is not completely random. Let me show you maybe another example. If you search for Obama, then, for example, the things that you have on the right are generally about Obamacare, right, which is a derogative term for the healthcare reform in the US.
In a negative way, you mean?
In a negative way, it's a derogative term. Right? So it's negative, exactly. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm very happy to be interrupted, right? So if something's not clear or sort of so, I mean, so thank you very much for setting an example or sort of so. Just shout out. I very much appreciate that. I'll show you some other examples also now for time. So there's this sort of trending over time. So let's go to a particular week, admittedly not the most user-friendly search interface at the moment. But so these are now, this is now data for the week before the 9/11 anniversary last year, right? So this is early September last year. And these are now trending political queries grouped by leaning. So let me show you some examples. So on the right, you have something that relates to 9/11. This is the 9/11 jumper photo. So this refers to photos of people jumping out of the World Trade Centers. But then on the left, you have things which you might not be familiar with. So 9/11 coloring book, right? And sort of when we set up this, what is the 9/11 coloring book? So now what this tool allows you to do is, so if you click, you issue the query to Yahoo, and you will see that this is the 9/11 coloring book. So it's a coloring book for kids, where kids get to color images like this, so of the assassination of Osama bin Laden and generally of the planning and execution of the attacks on the World Trade Center, right? So it's and this this coloring book is, I mean, the official name is We Shall Never Forget 9/11, and this book was picked up by the political left as being, you know, like a pretty stupid, let's say, idea, or at least very Islamophobic, right? So this is why in this week there's it's sort of trending on the political left. Another thing that the search tool allows you to do is you can search left or search right for this query term. So if you search left, you have the query 9/11 coloring book issued, but the search results are restricted to a set of certain domains. This already gives you a hint at how we compute the leaning. So here you will see results that are mostly very or highly critical about this demonizing Muslims, right? So that's like they would use such terms, or Islamophobic sort of. So those type of words you would find on the results on the left. But similarly, you can also search right if you want, and then you'll have still the same query, different set of results. So these are now results from sort of websites that are more leaning to the right, to the political right. So yeah, you would see this, for example, this is a log about jihad theology and ideology, etc., etc. So let me go to another week. So this was for the 9/11 example. If you're interested in the whole Occupy movement and how that unrolled in search. So this is the week when the, actually this is already 1 week past. Let's go 1 week here. So the Occupy protests started in sort of the second half of September. So this is pretty much exactly when they started. So they started in terms of search with a generic query Wall Street protest. So the label Occupy Wall Street didn't even exist at this point in time. Now when you go further in time, so next week, you have already this sort of this label, Occupy Wall Street, being used, Occupy San Francisco, Protest on Wall Street, etc., etc. So far there's nothing on the right, at least not among the highly polarized ones. If you then go further, again, lots of activity on the left. There's this new term coming in, 99%ers, get money out. Still, so far nothing on the right, at least nothing highly polarized. And only 4 weeks later, after the start, you have things such as Occupy Wall Street idiots, Occupy Wall Street anti-Semitism, or sort of come up, right? So this is like a nice sort of summary in terms of how this unrolled through search. Show you one other feature, because this will be, I will explain how this works in the talk, but there's another feature I will also be referring to in my presentation. So for certain queries, you see this symbol here, the scaled symbol. So if you click this, so it says fact check results for Obama's aunt. So what does it say at the bottom? So here's a quotation of something said by Michelle Beckman. President Obama's uncle and aunt are illegal aliens who've been allowed to stay in this country. And this was judged half true. So there's a truth statement, truth value to attach to this. So not by an algorithm, but actually by journalists. So this is a website who actually won a Pulitzer Prize a couple of years ago. And what this website does is it checks statements made by politicians, right? If Barack Obama or if Mitt Romney, let's say, says, oh, this is the highest unemployment rate ever since the Great Depression, right? They say, is this actually true, right? Or Barack Obama says, Mitt Romney wants to spend more on military than education and health care combined. Is that actually true? Is that part of sort of his plan, right? So this website checks statements made by politicians and tries to assign them a truth value. So here, in this case, this is the statement. So, well, you can check, are his uncle and aunt actually legal aliens? And in this case, it turns out, so there's lots of explanation about the history or sort of or so, but punchline being that his aunt is now a legal alien. She was granted asylum, but his uncle is still an illegal alien, so that's why they judged the statement half true. Right? So now later in the presentation, we'll sort of see this. So now at least this gives us a link to sort of link this query and its leaning to a statement with a truth value and a sort of a political affiliation of who said this. So far this is just to show you like what the tool does, but now there's some science behind. We did a bit of research and we played with the data, etc., etc. And so let me show you how this tool sort of works. So it all starts with a set of labeled blogs. So we have some blogs that are labeled as left-leaning. So these are big political blogs or political websites, actually. And similarly, we have such sites for the right. So on the left, the biggest example is the Huffington Post. On the right, the biggest example is the Drudge Report. Overall, there are roughly 1,000 such sites. Again, how were they obtained? They were not obtained through, the classification was not done by an algorithm. It could have been done by an algorithm, but we used manual annotation, mostly by these two people. These are political scientists at Harvard, and they used this set of blogs to analyze sort of link structure and other things in between. But we just used their set of annotations into left and right-leaning blogs. Now, the first thing we're interested in, who are the people who click on these blogs in terms of search results? So for registered Yahoo users, we have very basic demographic information. So we know the self-provided gender, the self-provided age, and also the zip code where they claim to live in the US. And now what we can do is we can find, so who are people who click on right-leaning blogs as results, right? So generally they are older, this is the average age, than people clicking on left-leaning results, but both people are older than typical online person. Just if you read political blogs, you're not going to be a teenager. They are more male, so if you read right-leaning blogs, tend to be more male than if you read left-leaning blogs. Again, both side parties attract people that are more male than the average user, again, because you're interested in political blogs. They're more white. So how did we know this? So we have a webcam installed and we look at the user and we know, no, that's not what he did. So remember I told you that we have the zip code of the user in the US, right? So now in the zip code in the US, so there's very rich census information. We can say, fine, where this person lives, what is the race distribution? But of course we don't know the individual person. If we say, fine, does he live in a white neighborhood? So this does not necessarily, of course we could have only outliers, but at least people clicking on right-leaning blogs tend to live in more white neighborhoods than people clicking on left-leaning blogs, right? And they're more likely to work for Yahoo. That's the joke. Let's ignore it. So now this is just about the individual sort of users now, but now how do we get sort of to queries, okay? Fine. So suppose somebody searches on Yahoo for pizza as a vegetable. I'll explain why somebody would search for this if you're not familiar with US politics. Then somebody clicks this result. This is a blog result on the Huffington Post. Now, let me briefly explain the context so that you're not confused by this. So I should say, when we first saw this is a real example that came up as a trending query in our tool. We first thought, there's a bug, right? Why on earth is pizza a vegetable and why would this be a political query in the first place, right? No, then it turns out this is a great hit actually. So there, last year, there was people in Congress were debating whether pizza should be classified as a vegetable for the following reasons. US schools, public schools in the US, are obliged by law to serve a certain fraction of vegetables to their student for lunch, right? Now pizza is very cheap, right? And there's some tomato sauce on the pizza, right? So now if you classify pizza as a vegetable, you can save a lot of money, right? So this is what this is debate about. So of course, some people said, well, tomatoes are fruit anyway, so if anything, pizza is a fruit, but that's sort of a different story. So anyway, suppose somebody searches for this query, pizza is a vegetable, you think, what on earth is going on in politics? Clicks this blog, in this case it's left-leaning. So now what we know about this blog, so we have this blog in our set of political sites for the left, right? We don't know anything about the particular page, we just have the whole domain in our set of left-leaning blogs. So now this is a vote, so if somebody casts a vote, hey, what's the leaning for this query? And this click is now a vote, should be left-leaning, right? So we have a vote for this query being left-leaning. So with this very, very basic setup, if this is what you did, you'd get this type of formula, which we'll expand in a second. You would just count, okay, for this query, how many clicks do I have on left-leaning results versus how many clicks on either left or right-leaning results. This is the first thing we tried. This is the first thing that comes to mind. Very, very basic, simple sort of voting. But one problem with this formula is that the volumes are very unevenly distributed. Generally, there's much more activity online coming from the left, partly because of the user demographics, because they have younger people who are sort of coming in. So if you literally followed this approach, you would have a systematic bias, like everything would be left-leaning because there's just so much more volume for the left. So what we decided is fine, we'll be fair, because we know in the US the voters are split 50-50, so we would say fine, we will give both the left and the right the same sort of voting strength. So we normalize by the certain strength they have, and they can decide how to distribute their votes among different queries, right? So now both sides have the same total amount of sort of query volume, and they can decide how to distribute this. So this is already better. There's still a small problem with this, and this is now sparsity. So now if a certain query is only observed 10 or 20 times, or sort of so, let's say, then, and it happens to be only observed on the one side, you would say, okay, 100% left-leaning, right? So now it's the usual sort of smoothing that comes in, so you don't want to jump to conclusions too fast. You want to say 100% left. You say, fine, if I've observed this query 1,000 times, only on the left? Then I say yes, fully left. If I've only observed it 10 times, I say, well, mostly left, right? So you do some smoothing. In this case, sort of standard.
Could you put your microphone
Lower?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, better? Okay, see? So you apply sort of standard sort of smoothing to address this, this issue. Some examples, yeah, I already showed some. Other things, so now in the analysis, this is not in the tool, this is just in the analysis that we did. We also mapped queries to Wikipedia entities. We used two different approaches to map queries to Wikipedia entities. One is an in-house classifier. Another one is a very, very simple heuristics that just issues the query, let's say Obama healthcare bill, to Yahoo as a search engine and looks at the highest ranked result returned from Wikipedia. And usually this very, very simple heuristics gives you a good match of queries to entities. Now, so here what you see, these are now queries with their leaning. So a leaning of 1.0 for us is fully left. A leaning of 0.0 is fully right. And these are queries that all map to the Wikipedia entity, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Still lower? Maybe? Okay, I'll put it even lower. Okay. Okay, let's see. So, and now, okay, so you sort of see that the right refers to it as Obamacare, whereas the left refers to it like as healthcare or sort of so. But another thing that's interesting that comes out here is that you will see that actually they have similar concerns. So this was done before the ruling of the Supreme Court. So the left word is Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, whereas the right is thinking, is Obamacare constitutional? Right? So it's the same, it's exactly the same concerns, but you see this thing called framing, right? Sort of the words that they use to refer to the same issue. Very nice example of this sort of framing coming in. Another thing, again, we just did for this sort of analysis, not part of the demo, is that once you have things mapped to Wikipedia entities, you can also look at the categories that they are listed under. And so now this shows you some examples for queries mapped to the Wikipedia category. I mean, first to the Wikipedia entity mentioning Occupy, and then ultimately to Wikipedia category Occupy. And so again, you sort of now, you're no longer restricted, as you weren't here, to the actual term Occupy being present, but you also have things such as we are the 99%ers. Or the right is concerned with like rape, violence, crime, sort of more negative aspects of the Occupy movement. So this was just for the individual queries. So I mentioned before that you can now also map, that we try to map queries to statements. So I showed you one example about Obama's aunt live. Here's another one. The query cost Obama trip to India. So this query was actually triggered. In this case, it's very nice because it's really triggered by this statement made. So again, Michelle Bachmann said, the President of the United States will be taking a trip over to India that is expected to cost the taxpayers $200 million a day. And that's a lot of money, sort of, if you think about this. So this is what she said, and then this created an outcry. How on earth, who's going on holidays in India, and we're paying for this with taxpayer money, so that type of usual debate coming up. But of course, if you think about it clearly, this is at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude sort of too much, and so this was judged false. By the same site I mentioned before, by PolitiFact. Now, what this gives us is, again, sort of I mentioned before, we have a mapping between queries, from web search queries to statements that come from PolitiFact. These statements now have a truth value, and we also know who said it. And for who said it, we also know the party affiliation, whether it was a Democrat or Republican. Right? Now, this is really the best case, that this query matches perfectly this statement, and this statement actually caused this query to, this query didn't exist before this statement was made. Generally, the mapping is not as perfect as this. So like something like Obama healthcare might be mapped, of course, not just to one statement, but to several queries that are just more loosely related to Obama and healthcare. So it's not always a one-to-one mapping, and it's also not always like right on spot as the example above. So now, still, we try to use this mapping and try to see, okay, fine. Now for a query, we have a political leaning, essentially based on the results that are clicked in response to it. So a right-leaning query means one for which there's mostly right-leaning results being clicked. And now for a query, we have a mapping to statements, and for the statements, we have a truth value, right? So now we can look at things such as correlation, right? So queries with a strong right-leaning, are they more likely to be true or not, right? Than queries with a strong left-leaning. Anybody dare to guess what you found? No? Nobody? Well, we didn't find any correlation, right? So both sides seem to lie just as much or as little, at least in terms of correlation. So, okay, world is, as you expect. But then we said, fine, but that's not what you should look at. You should sort of control for another variable, because maybe it just depends on, if a Republican makes a wrong and false statement, then it has a left leaning. Whereas if a Republican makes a true statement, it has a right leaning. So maybe you have to condition on the source, or rather on the affiliation of who says it, right? But again, even there we didn't find any correlation. Maybe our mapping is just too weak, as you saw. But still, there's one thing we did find sort of interesting, and there we looked at correlation with a volume, which statements attract more search volume. And so there we found the following. These are normalized search volumes. If you just look at the average search volume that true or false statements attract, you would see that false statements tend to attract more search volume, about like almost 40% more volume. But now if you look at the breakdown, you see that at the median point, at the typical sort of search volume, sort of mapping to the statements, there's no difference whatsoever, right? It really happens at these sort of outliers, so that like false statements seem to be much better at create, or at least we found correlation with false statements attracting outlier search volume, right? Again, we're not claiming causality. We're not claiming, hey, if you want to attract lots of attention, you should make an outrageously, obviously false claim or so. But it hints a bit at this time type of thing sort of picking up. That's actually all about the sort of first part. Are there sort of questions about this part of so? And the demo's online. You're welcome to sort of play with it or sort of a certain question. But maybe let me go on to the second part of so, because I think this was also very interesting. So this is now for doing something similar with Twitter data. So let me first motivate maybe Twitter and politics or so if it's usual. Well, I mean, 4 years ago or so, I mean, as you know, this guy won the US elections. And one of the reasons or so that's often given is that he was just much more successful in using social media in general, like grassroots movement to mobilize people. And so, for example, now, like the competitions have, the candidates have sort of kind of this online competition where they're trying to get as many followers as possible, right? Somehow this is sort of like indication for popularity or so. And recently there was a story, I don't know if you're familiar, where suddenly from one day to the other, the count of followers for Mitt Romney jumped up by 200,000 or 300,000 from one day to the other or so. And then most of those people following him, they were not following anybody else or didn't have any followers themselves or so, right? And so people think, well, probably he spent some of his $1 billion or so in just getting up this number, right? So people really do care about what's going on Twitter and also about the sort of having many followers so. Yeah, and of course, anyway. So this is sort of like actively that they are trying to push something on sort of Twitter. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is quite interesting, is that here's an article on the New York Times that explains that, before these people go into a press conference, they would actually, well, not themselves, but their staff, would very carefully read what's going on Twitter and what people are talking about in relation to them, so that they can preempt questions, right? If everybody on Twitter is talking about the fact that Mitt Romney had a dog on his car when he was traveling, right? It's a true story. So he was traveling with the dog on his on the roof of his car, and then if the candidate already knows, I'm going to get a question about this, he can already prepare like the perfect answer. So yes, that's true, my dog likes fresh air. I don't know what he says, or something like that. So they actually sort of monitor this, what other people are thinking about them. So you see they watch with a Twitter stream open on their computer. Another thing, and this is now more related to what we did in the study, is about these hashtag wars, right? So Here, Obama, this is now a statement made by Obama about Mitt Romney, and you can pretty much put their campaign on a tweet and have some characters to spare. Right? So now this statement now created this hashtag characters to spare to come into existence, right? And the phrase was initially mocked by Romney supporters and anti-Obama conservatives, but then it became a battleground. People really tried to define this term for supporters on both sides. So let me show you 2 examples. So here, there's now somebody with a political right-leaning using this hashtag, characters to spare. Unemployment at 8.2% for a record 40 straight months, right? That's Obama summarized, and you even have some characters to spare, right? And then, of course, the left fights back with tweets such as this. This is an honest, literal quote. I'm not concerned about the very poor. Mitt Romney, characters to spare, right? And so now they're trying, both sides sort of try to pull this hashtag towards their own meaning. They're trying to define the terms that are being used to discuss politics, right? So it's kind of like some big brother and sort of speech that they're trying to define. So let me also show you a live demo here. This is unfortunately not yet public, so this is now inside the company network, so this is now inside VPN. Yeah, let me search for maybe Obama again. Yeah, okay, so here on the, these are now hashtags, so it's very similar to what you saw before for queries. This is now political polarization of hashtags. So things that would explain how this is, how these leanings are computed in the talk. So something that is very, very strongly polarized on the left. So Obama, Biden 2012, it's a sort of supportive hashtag for the campaign, and things such as a very right, Obama fail, Obamanomics, Obama on empty, Obama isn't working, etc., etc. So let me show you some other things. So where
what demo with anywhere? I mean, the other one you have a live demo available on the internet. And
this one, no, this one not. No, this one unfortunately, hopefully it will be available eventually, but it's not yet publicly available. I can show you later if you want sort of other examples. So here, for example, now just to show some other features apart from the basic sort of leaning type of stuff. Where possible, we try to show a definition from TagDev. It's an external website. Again, sort of if you don't know what Obama fail means, well, in this case, kind of obvious. You know, it says used whenever President Obama policy fails, also used when President Obama will lead to the destruction of the United States. So this is actual user-generated content. There are some Obama example tweets. In this case, there are only example tweets from the right. Obama said he would hold unemployment under 8%. It has been under 8% for 36. It hasn't been under 8% for 3 months. So if you get a bit of context for this, let me show some other things. So yeah, well, this triggers a search on Twitter. This was just used in the last week where we sort of built this data set. So this is only was started being popular in May. So in this case, the volume trend over time is not very interesting. Other things you can do is, I mean, this is just, there's no research involved here. You can search on Topsy for the thing, and you can search New York Times for this thing. So let me explain how this demo now sort of works. So in this case, so we don't have political blogs here, but what we have is, so we start with a set of seed users with a known political orientation, right? We assume that Barack Obama is sort of left-leaning according to our definition, and Mitt Romney would be right-leaning, and we have a bunch of, about a dozen other big Democrat figures on the official party accounts here and there. Small footnote here, actually we were careful to exclude the actual account White House, because the political affiliation of the White House can change over time. But we're assuming that the political affiliation of Barack Obama does not change. And this is a small methodological point. Then for the seed users, we get all their tweets from the Twitter search API. So all of this was done using public data. So no internal fire hoses, sort of. So all of this was built using public API data. So now we get a tweet such as whatever this one, something Obama says, and of course, and similarly for Mitt Romney and others on the right. And now we look at people, so you'd see both of these are typically retweeted many, many times, like hundreds of times, right? And so now we extend this from the seed set, we get all the retweets. You know, we sort of try to see this tweet was retweeted 472 times. Well, actually through the public API we can only get the last 100 tweets, fine. So we get the last 100 retweets for this tweet, and similarly for the right we get as many retweets of the seed users' tweets as possible. Now the basic idea is, and this was shown by other people, not by us, although we confirmed it later, is that if you retweet somebody with a certain political leaning, this is a sign of engagement. Endorsement, sorry, it's a sign of endorsement, that you agree with them. You might address them with an @ You're saying, look, at Barack Obama, yet another failure, but you're unlikely to retweet what this person says unless you actually agree with them. Right? So this is a basic fact not discovered by us, sort of obvious anyways, that we sort of reuse. And later I will show some numbers that this is a sensible thing to do. So first thing in terms of data cleaning, after getting all retweeters, we removed people from outside the US, because we were interested in US opinions about US politics, not what Germans think or Spanish or Russians or sort of thing. So we removed people from other countries, sort of. So here's an example. So this is a French user in this case who retweets Barack Obama. And so what we did for this is we used only users who explicitly stated a location in Twitter. Right? So in Twitter you have this option, you can state your location. Right? And this is free text. You can say land of Putin. It doesn't have to be Russia or so, right? So you can put anything. And so in this case, you know, she retweeted him or sort of. So now we don't want her in our data set. Now how were those removed? So we used a tool, Yahoo Placemaker. Probably Yandex has similar tools, I assume. This is a public one. That takes a bit of string and identifies geographic locations mentioned there, right? So it takes a string and it outputs essentially geo-coordinates, right, with a sort of entity attached to it. And so now we say, okay, anybody who does not have a US entity mentioned here, out. We're not interested. So, okay, now the question is, okay, after this cleaning, after using only US users, after having this sort of retweet behavior, do we actually have users, do we have the correct leaning for a particular person? So what we use as a ground truth here are public directories. So these are public user directories where users can enter themselves. There are two big ones, WeFollow and Twello. They are organized by topics. So here you have people that are listed, or Twitter users listed under Democrat, Twitter users listed under Republican. So now for the subset that we have, or the intersection in our set and in their set, we can see if they agree. And generally, yeah, they agree quite well, about 90%, 98% for this one, 93% for this one. Actually, if you look slightly deeper, ours is even better because there are some false positives in this set. So there's like some user who writes that he despises Republicans, so he hates Republicans, is actually listed under Republican. And so if you then actually do some manual inspection, you would see that the true accuracy is actually closer to 99 or 95%. So it's a reasonable, again, you could do some other machinery here, you could use machine learning, look at the graph structure, etc., use the actual content of the tweets. But this was like a fairly easy, quick way to get a reasonably large set of users with a political leaning. So now we have a set of political users, so just to show you. So this is now not yet filtered for anything being political or not. This is just to show you what they sort of, the tag cloud of the hashtags they use, right? And of course, people on the left often use P2, this is Progressives 2.0. TCOT is top conservatives on Twitter. So this makes sense, but of course you'd see even the left uses TCOT a lot and even the right uses P2 a lot. This is not yet filtered by being political in any way, so you also have things such as Follow Friday or Facebook being very popular, or there's music in here or sort of or so. It's just to give you first indication that yes, they differ in terms of the hashtags they use, right? Or the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender is sort of coming in here, etc. Now, out of these, we want to filter out the ones that are not political. Right? We don't want to assign a leaning to Facebook. We don't want to, at least not in the demo. It doesn't make sense to show a most popular thing on the left, Facebook. Well, kind of true, but it's not political. So, yeah, how do we? What do we do to tell the hashtags that are non-political, such as Facebook, favorite albums? Well, sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious, right? Yes, 4M, is that political or not? USMC, so just doing some like classification on just these words as sort of a source probably not going to work. So what we did, this was also done by other people before, so we don't claim novelty for this, is we looked at co-occurrence with seed political hashtags. We say, fine, the hashtag P2 is political, TCOT political, GOP political, anything mentioning Obama political, anything mentioning Romney political, right? So now we have a set of seed political hashtags, and then we look at the hashtags that have the highest co-occurrence. So given that the hashtag is present, what's the probability that also a political hashtag is present? And then we get a ranking at this, and we say, fine, like we take the top 10 in terms of how political they are. Another thing, so we did this on a week-by-week basis. So we don't say globally that the hashtag America or something or so is always political. We're saying this could vary over time. You know, maybe during the Olympics, the hashtag Russia was, you know, just related to sports. But maybe now with pussy rights this week's, Russia, you know, might again be political or sort of. So we're saying, so we don't have this sort of fixed over time. We're allowing it to vary by week. So we're doing this on a week-by-week basis. And then finally, in terms of data cleaning, if you want to implement this, well, we remove very low volume hashtags. So this is the, just to see what's political. Then for the demo, which again, we have this notion of trending over time. Pretty standard sort of stuff. Again, you could use any kind of trend detection formula. This is a standard one that was used by colleagues of us before in another publication. Essentially, it just sort of compares to, a trending hashtag is one that is used more than expected. More than expected in sort of two ways. So first, you compare the volume of the hashtag in the week compared to the total volume of all hashtags in that week, right? And if this is large, if this is like 30% of the volume, you say, wow, there seems to be something going on. But of course, this in itself would always show something like Facebook or Follow Friday as trending every week, just because they are so widely popular, or even TCOT or P2, of course, after filtering. So now what you have to do is you compare this to the sort of like what you would expect from historic evidence. So if you're saying, fine, this hashtag, if I go back over time, if I look at previous weeks in the past, what is sort of its previous fraction over time, right? And sort of, so okay, previously it has always been 30%, and so it's also 30% this week. Well, then it's not trending. It's very popular, but it's not trending. Trending has to be, you know, has to go up. So basic formula sort of to detect things such as like, you know, Obama got Osama was of course sort of trending in the week when, you know, he actually got Osama, or well, not him personally or sort of so. Occupy Wall Street is trending in September, etc., etc. But in things such as like vote or democracy are never trending because they're just always sort of there. I mean, vote might be trending probably closer to the election day. Now, actually the most important part, I guess, is how do we assign a leaning. So the basic approach is, again, so there's kind of like this voting approach. And I will explain, I'll give you the formula for this sort of in a second. We just see, okay, fine. The leaning of a hashtag is, you know, the vote that the left gets out of the vote for either the left or the right. Now again, there are many things you could try for this sort of voting strength. You could first use the mere counts. Again, you bump into this volume issue. As you do this, you have the same sort of bias. So we did the same things. We normalized for counts. We said, fine, each side has the same voting strength to distribute among the different hashtags. So you look, you know, for this leaning, this is now either a left or a right. You look at, okay, in this week, what is their total volume? And in this week, what's the total fraction of volume they used on a particular hashtag? And they're saying, fine, the left devoted 10% of its strength on a particular hashtag. And then again, you do some standard sort of smoothing to cope with sparsity. You do this, and now you get sort of things like this again. So I already showed some plausible things sort of before. The hashtag GOP fail is always left-leaning, left-leaning, left-leaning. Makes sense. It's sort of very critical of the right. Things such as no Obama, similarly attacking hashtag on the right. It's not always that simple. Sometimes there are things changing over time. So anonymous started out as being very left-leaning when it was first sort of popular. It appeared in our data. And now it's sort of moving towards sort of center or sort of or so. Right now both sides tend to use it. And here's a similar one for the other side. This we didn't study, but we studied the following cases, which we found even more interesting. So here, you have examples of something, this case is now middle class. Middle class is typically used, the hashtag is dominated by the left, but then there are these outlier weeks. So suddenly, there's a strong shock to the system, and it jumps in leaning, right? So if it jumps from left leaning to even slightly right leaning or so right? Similarly, this is for Virginia GOP. So this is usually used by the right, but there are certain cases where it jumps up and it's now sort of, goes, just deviates from its normal state. So we call these sort of like change points, right? So this is standard sort of terminology, so we're interested in these sort of change points. So to detect these change points, I mean, we use a very simplistic approach just to sort of, because we're more interested in what causes them. So we filter out hashtags that don't have sufficient support. Total number of weeks needs to be present. The hashtag needs to be at least so and so many weeks. Otherwise, if it's only present in 1 week, how do we know if it's an outlier or not? So you need to have this so you know what's normal. Then we look at things that differences between the relative and absolute change in the leaning from the previous week. So if it needs to go, needs to change from the previous week. It cannot just stay constant compared to the previous week. It needs to change from its normal state as well. So if you compare the current value to the average value, and it sort of goes, the leaning has to go into the other direction. So if it's usually left, it needs to go towards the right. If it's usually right, it needs to go towards the left. Very simple sort of rule-based definition or sort of, but it works reasonably well, and so at least you detect these type of things you can now analyze. So okay, fine, now you have sort of a very simple algorithm to detect this point and this point. Of course, you could use other outlier detection mechanisms or definitions, whatever you want to use to detect or rather define these points. So now we're fine, now we have them, so what causes them? What's going on, right? So how do these points differ from the rest? So one thing, so our basic hypothesis, if you go back to this first slide I have about hashtag wars, is that there should be something odd going on with the volume to user ratio, right? Sort of like a high volume to user ratio means that like a small set of users are using the hashtag lots and lots and lots of times, right? There are like 2 users who each use it like 100 times in the same week. And this set of users we would call hijackers, right? They're trying to pull the hashtag towards their own leaning, right? And whereas this is low, this really means if it's a low volume to user ratio, if each user only uses it once, it's sort of like a hashtag that's used by the general masses. So so what do you see sort of here? So this is now this volume to user ratio. This is what this VUR stands for. SL is for same leaning. OL is for other leaning. Okay, volume to user ratio, same leaning, other leaning. Fine. Then there's something left, right. Okay, so explain the rest. This is just average value of change points, CP, versus non-change points. Okay, so let me start maybe with the most important thing here. These are sort of these things here. You see that the average volume to user ratio for the other leaning is like twice as high during change points than it is during non-change points. So during non-change point user, a user uses a hashtag like between 1 or twice within a week, right? But now during these change points, weeks like a user uses it much more often, right? Like twice as much. Similarly, this happens for both usually left-leaning hashtags and usually right-leaning hashtags. So you see that in both cases, there seems to be the other side seems to be now focusing its attention on this, where it's the own side, the same leaning, doesn't have this at all. It's actually even slightly lower, right? They're not fighting back during the same week in a sense, at least not as focused. Fine, so this gives you an indication that there are these hijackers. Now, who are these hijackers, right? So here are some examples you can look at later. Sublime, there they are. They're like so this is maybe let me show you them. So these are the top ones. The top ones in terms of the number of times that they appear in this hashtag week pairs. Maybe let's show you Lexonex. Lexonex. Okay, so it's already like defeat liberalism, right? So there's no doubt about his leaning or sort of or so. And well, in terms of, I will later show you more general sort of summaries in a second, or sort of so in terms of what he writes, you'll see, okay, lots and lots of hashtags, of course. Well, not of course. I mean, lots and lots of hashtags, and often links to external blogs or articles. And similarly, the user on the left actually looks quite similar. TP TP. So if you look at sort of what he says, okay, Biden is absolutely correct, so he gives you no doubt about his political sort of leaning. Again, you can tell he's very, very active, right? So like this is just in the last couple of hours or sort of so. So generally, these hijackers, as we sort of call them, yes, they are more active than normal users. So in our time period, they have like between 4 and 5 times more tweets that they create, and also the number of followers and the people they are following is sort of substantially higher than larger users, right? So first we thought, fine. So maybe the reason that we're picking up these guys so many times is just because they're more active, right? If you're just more active, you're going to happen to bump into more of these change points, but it's not your intention. You just thought, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, right? But no, if you then look at the focus, at the sort of the volume of their tweets that fall into these that cause these hashtag weak pairs, you'd see that they are much more focused. That there's like much more of their tweets fall into the hashtag the weak pairs, sort of into the troublemakers. Last thing good timing, I guess. So last thing I briefly want to mention, so again, now we look at fine. So now all the hashtags are sort of micro topics, right? So very, very microscopic sort of, so, but what's slightly broader? Like what about everything related to healthcare, everything related to the primaries or sort of, right? So we clustered hashtags. Again, not the most innovative idea, but it gave reasonably good results. Again, we used just a very simple clustering algorithm. You could use any other algorithm, LDA, God knows what. We simply used clustered using simple k-means on co-occurrence feature vector. So we have this hashtag typically co-occurs with those other hashtags with a feature vector. We cluster. So you could use other clustering algorithms, no question about it. And sort of, so first let me show you, so now we used k equals 25. We played with various measures to choose the best k, but there was no measure of k that stuck out in any standard way of defining the sort of best case. So we said, fine, 25 is as good as any when it comes to like having like a reasonable granularity for sort of clusters, right? And so you'd see that generally they're actually reasonably nice. Not always perfect, but sort of quite nice. So here you have a very strong cluster about gay rights. I looked all of those up, and all of those are related to gay rights. I forgot no hate, SSM, same-sex marriage, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. DOMA, I forgot also something from the same domain. I forgot, right? You have clusters related to sort of Wall Street. You have things related to sort of the primaries or sort of or so. And so generally works well, and a lot of these are actually interpretable. This is a cluster about Mitt Romney, like differences between Mitt Romney and Obama, endorse Mitt, Team Romney, no to Obama, go Mitt. So fine. Now what we did with this is we wanted to see what's happening to these clusters over time. Right? So now there are two things that can happen over time. So one is just the volume, so how much of the total volume do they get, like how much do their hashtags sort of attract, and the other thing is a sort of change in leaning. Is the leaning sort of changing over time as time goes on, right? So maybe let me pick some examples. So volume generally makes most sense. So there's one cluster which we labeled as Occupy, which of course sort of shoots up in activity when the Occupy movement is happening. It dwarfs almost all other hashtags. This is a logarithmic scale, so it's like 10 times or 100 times more than other sort of clusters, and then sort of it dwindles down. There's a cluster related to Wisconsin and Scott Walker, which again, like towards July, gained traction. Mitt Romney, yeah, over time, right, more and more people are now that it's sort of clear he's running against Barack Obama, is picking up in volume, etc., etc. And similarly also for the leaning of Mitt Romney, like generally, of course, there are sort of outliers. There seems to be like a trend, right? Like initially, when it was not quite clear that he was actually running or that he would be the selected one, the chosen one, he has maybe more of a like full right leaning, but now sort of the other side is sort of picking up on him and attacking him sort of more and more. Again, so there's no quantitative message here, just to sort of show you like a very basic visualization that you can do once you have that type of data. Ongoing work, last slide I have. So we're currently actively working on generalizing this beyond a two-party system. Right? In particular, we're looking at the UK and at Germany, just essentially for language reasons. So there, currently we have a hard membership. We're saying you're either left, you're either right. Now, especially if you have more and more parties or so, maybe this is no longer true, right? Because you might support the Green Party when it comes to environmental issues, but you might support another party when it comes to economic issues, right? So you can retweet different parties on different rights. So maybe you can be 10% Green, 30% conservative, etc., right? Also now when it comes to visualization, things are no longer one-dimensional, left to right axis, left, right, so where you are in the spectrum. So have something like more dimensional in a sense, right? So this is just a random radar plot, just taken from the Wikipedia page, no relation to politics, but you could imagine that you have different political parties sort of on these sort of axes, and now that each color represents one hashtag. Maybe the hashtag gay rights or so is very strong among Green and left, and very nothing on the political right, etc., etc. So maybe you need other types of visualizations. Visualizations generally, right? So if you're familiar with TED, this will be one of the talks that you've come across or so. There are other nice visualization libraries out there that we are sort of exploring, right? So here this is sort of the, I think there was the bubble was the population size, and I forgot what was like life expectancy. So I forgot, it's not my talk, I forgot. I watched it by some time, but you could imagine something like this as time goes on, week by week by week, you have something like this you can watch as a movie, where now the bubble is maybe either, if you have a cluster, it could be the size of the cluster, if it's a hashtag, it could be the popularity of the hashtag, and you could have things such as leaning, maybe just on the x-axis, whether the hashtag is more or left, more right-leaning or not. So it would still be in the two-dimensional case. For more parties, unclear how to sort of generalize this. That's pretty much all. So thanks a lot. Any questions or sort of? So yeah, otherwise I'm also happy to answer otherwise later by email or sort of. So questions from the audience?
If you want to ask question, please raise your hand, okay? And I will give you the microphone. Okay, so maybe I can ask.
Yeah, no, yeah.
The first volunteer.
Okay, thank you, Ingmar. My name is Vladimir. I have a question to you. So today we have an article in Russian Forbes that Russian government right now is implementing sophisticated systems to evaluate the opinion of the internet, to evaluate the opinion of the blogs, of the social networks, and so on. And there are two different ways how experts think of it. Some experts think that it is nothing to do with it, so it's too late to affect these people, for example, who say some bad stuff on the internet of our government. And the second opinion is it is still possible to influence these trends. It's still possible to break these trends or to influence somehow these people who impact the internet opinion. What is your opinion of this? Do you think it is possible somehow to resist this pressure from government on the internet, or just using the same techniques as you shown and the same techniques they are now implemented, is it possible for them to influence the internet? Just particularly in Russia or maybe in other countries.
So the worst case I know of is what happened in Syria. So in Syria, Facebook used to be blocked, but then the government opened it for some time, sort of just to, and then all the opposition party, created Facebook pages and started to communicate. And the government was happy because now they had the whole opposition nicely mapped out, who knew whom or sort of was so right, and then they just essentially executed all of them, and that was the end of that sort of so right. So I mean, hopefully that's not what will happen in Russia or sort of so, but definitely there could be very nasty uses sort of to this type of sort of monitoring. I mean, the best case, of course, you could think, well, at least they can sort of learn for it, right? I mean, maybe what Mitt Romney is doing is maybe a better case. At least they actually care about what people say about them, sort of to prepare at least sort of for that type. So at least that they are, not ignoring what people are saying about them online. Yeah, how it would turn out in In Russia, I don't know. I'm not the expert on Russian politics, right? I mean, I have probably a fairly biased view, as most Westerners are sort of so there. I don't know. I don't want to, especially as this is being recorded. I'm not going to say anything. Maybe later offline.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
Have you tried to classify the Twitter users based on followers graph and URL user graph?
So we haven't done this. So other people, also colleagues inside Yahoo, have done this sort of, so that they, both on the content and their sort of friendship relationship and the following or sort of so, and they worked quite well. I mean, they got similar accuracy, not quite as good as ours. I think they had like 88% accuracy using the same sort of ground truth or sort of so that that we had. I don't remember if they used all. I mean, I don't remember if they used URLs as features or sort of or so. There I'd have to look up exactly the features they use. We haven't tried this. So there are other people who are definitely actively using that, no question at all, sort of using the user classification. For us, because also, so this was done using public Twitter API. So there we were essentially just rate limits, sort of. So there we had in the end, like I think between 100,000 and 200,000 users. For us, that was plenty, right? If you now through classification would have millions or so, we wouldn't have enough, just wouldn't have, like, we would not have fit through the API essentially, sort of. So for us, that was not a concern. So yes, there is work out there. I could point you to work, but we haven't tried any of that.
Okay, but given that a lot of users gets political information from some hub users, so you can identify them and download via API incoming followers arrows. So that's true. So also, when it comes to now, I mean, many people inside of Twitter, of course, are looking at. So this study so far has been pretty oblivious of the whole network structure. So we did not try to find, who are the influencers who sort of seed the hashtags. Do they come more from the party themselves, or sort of, or so, or are there certain hubs that spread them? Others adapt this, or sort of, or so. Other people have looked at hashtag adoption, how it spreads. That was not our focus. Our focus at the moment was just to assign like a leaning to them, like a very sort of limited or sort of a range. We didn't want to go into the whole influence. So yes, it's a very valid point. It's definitely important to sort of look at, but no, we haven't done anything along those lines here. Thank you.
Okay, so I suppose now there are no questions. I want to thank Ingmar and also to thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
And keep in touch with Yandex events. Follow us, and we invite you to the next seminar. It will be on the 31 August. Thank you.